Good evening, everyone. It's October 21, 2012. I'm Rene Ritchie, and tonight we're talking about Cingleton Deux. We're talking about scaling Apple, we're talking about Tweetbot for Mac, and we're talking about the magazine. This is the iMore Show. So my guest this evening is the renowned Guy English of Kicking Bear fame, Cingleton fame, and soon-to-be aged and distilled napkin fame. How you doing, Guy?
Very good. You?
Oh, very well, thank you. And I have a lot, I owe you a lot of that this week because you did a fantastic conference just last week called Cingleton, but it was part deux.
Part deux, exactly, for the Francophone audience. So, yeah.
So are you okay with you start with that?
That's great. Yeah, for sure.
All right, perfect. So Cingleton, I mean, you spoke about it when you were on previously. It's a conference that you and Luc Van Daal and Scott Morrison and Petra Mueller, that's right, put together to kind of, I see it as something in between Macworld and WWDC, but without the crowds. That's a nice way of putting it, I think.
We don't aim to be particularly technical. And yeah, I mean, we do try to keep it down to a small number of people. We had about 120 attendees this year, plus speakers and all that. Last year it was even smaller, it was about 70 to 80. So.
And it was a fantastic mix because this year you had developers, designers, media type people, and it really kept things moving.
Thanks. Yeah, I think last year we didn't have a design talk, and Brad Ellis, who spoke this year, kind of gave me grief for it. So we made sure that we invited him, and he did a good job. So.
Yeah, he gave you grief, and then he became elected to fix the grief that he was giving you.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna, if you're going to give me grief, I'm going to make you fix the problem.
And he got up on stage. I mean, there's a few talks worth this. I mean, all of them were fantastic. There's a few worth pulling out. This guy is a designer. He got up on stage and proceeded to pull out Quartz Composer, which floored me.
It was crazy. We will eventually have the videos out, so I mean the listeners will be able to see this at some point. But he wrote a little app to demonstrate color picking, like basically finding complementary colors for a UI, and he did it entirely in Quartz Composer. And it had pop-up menus and it had scroll bars, like none of which Quartz Composer supports. One thing he didn't say on stage was that what he saw on his machine was different than what was getting projected. He had a control interface on his machine, and what was being projected was something different. And the way he was doing that was rendering one patch into a texture and then sending it out to the projector, which is insane. It's Quartz Composer. I don't know heads or tails from Quartz Composer. I can't do anything. And he did something that would be impressive native code, let alone doing a Quartz Composer patch.
It's like chipping ice for a fine cocktail with a jackhammer.
Exactly. It's a great way of putting it. And he will swear blind that he can't program.
Yes.
But he's crazy. He's a very talented programmer.
He also said on stage that he's not a very good designer, so I don't think we can take him for his word at anything at this point.
No, he's just a big fat liar.
So Jason Snell from Macworld kicked off the show, and the theme you chose for this year was scaling. Was there a particular resonance you had with scaling this year?
Yeah, so I mean, last year, we tried to pick a theme each year. Last year, it was that we were at an inflection point. There was a bunch of big changes going on. This year, we felt that things were growing. Certainly the Mac App Store was bringing our apps to a lot more, like a much broader audience. iOS is just going like gangbusters still. IDG had a bunch of big changes. Jason Snell now, who was running Macworld, now runs Macworld and PC World and TechHive. And so he basically, they ended up promoting all the Mac people into running sort of the cross discipline, I guess.
A reflection of the current status of the consumer electronic world, maybe.
Exactly. So I thought that was there's a lot of interesting things going on in terms of how Apple associated people in industries are now sort of on top rather than being the typical underdog.
And it was very nice because Dan Morin closed out last year's Cingleton by explaining everything you need to know about Apple using Star Wars as a metaphor. So Snell could not let that lie. He had to try to one-up him using the Wrath of Khan, which was brilliant and terrifying.
I know. I got an email from him as he was preparing his talk, and he asked me if, I don't know, he cracked that joke to me, and I think I just replied with laughter, like ha ha ha. And then when he actually ran with it, I was like, this is awesome.
I'll never get out of my head. All I'm going to keep hearing forever now is Google tasks me. They tasked me and I shall have them.
Yeah, he did a good job. I like the, this never would have happened if Khan was alive. It's one of my favorites.
Oh, there's a lot of truth in that. Some of the other ones that stood out for me, Michael Jurowitz, who up until very, very recently was an evangelist at Apple. Now he's at Black Pixel. And he talked, the number one piece of feedback I give a developer typically when they ask me for it with their apps is, please charge money for this. And that's exactly the focus of his talk.
I was very pleased that he agreed to speak, because it's the first thing he's spoken at post Apple, and clearly being an ex Apple guy, he's amazing at giving talks. He used to give all the he's done WWDC, and he did all the tech talks, which is, for people who don't know, it's Apple evangelists sort of travel around the world and give refined or polished up or abbreviated maybe.
It's the Dub Roadshow.
Thank you. That's the best way of putting it. Yeah. So he's a terrific speaker, and he did an amazing job. And what I loved is he couldn't have said what he said at Cingleton while he was at Apple. Yep. He basically said, charge money for your apps. Just you're undervaluing it. And not only did he just say it, but he had data to back it up.
Yep.
He actually,
it turns out he's an economics major. Who knew?
I didn't know. I had no idea. But yeah, he's an economics major, and he brought it to bear. And he dude had graphs. When you bring graphs, it's a mean business.
And unlike a lot of the other presenters, he had axes on those graphs.
Yes. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. A graph without an axis is a little bit cheating.
But I mean, it was a good message. His first message was that these are the realities of the App Store. There are certain things you can and cannot do. And because Apple owns the store, you've got to live with them. You've got to suck it up, and you've got to do the best job you can. And then you've got to pay. You've got to charge enough for your apps to sustain your business, because otherwise neither you nor your apps will be there long term.
Right. Exactly. Which is, it seems obvious, if you think about the way business works, but with sort of the novelty of the App Store and the massive scaling and everything going on, some things get lost in the gold rush mentality a bit, I think.
Yeah. And the race to the bottom, and this crazy idea that, give it away for free, accumulate a lot of users, ... money.
Yeah. I mean, I think things like Instagram sort of make that seem like a viable strategy, but 99 times out of 10, it's just a stupid idea.
You get hit by lightning, you might become the Flash. Most often, you'll just get electrocuted.
Right. And I've tried it. It doesn't work.
It's a scientific method. Right. Another one that was interesting to me, Serenity Caldwell, also from Macworld, was talking about ebooks. And she made an interesting point because we've seen recently, and Mac Stories did a fantastic job mapping the Apple ecosystem compared to Amazon and Microsoft and Google, and showing the lead Apple has in a lot of media, but not necessarily in books. But what she brought out that was interesting to me is that Amazon's books weren't necessarily good at the beginning. They were like black and white photocopies. They were just a huge catalog of black and white photocopies.
Right. So yeah, I was excited when we got her to speak, because I think ebooks or iBooks are going to be an increasingly important, it goes back to that scaling kind of thing, or the growth. Like, I think ebooks are going to become an increasingly important and manifest themselves in our day-to-day lives a lot more within a few years, kind of thing. I started reading so much more after I got my iPad 3, and I think this rumored iPad Mini, which will be out in a couple of days,
soon to be no longer rumored.
Right? Yeah. I think reading is going to increasingly move to these kind of devices. And ebooks is a horrible format.
Yeah.
or EPUB, I should say. And there's a lot of really awful edge cases around that. And the way that you produce this kind of content is horrible. And if you haven't sort of looked into it or heard about it, you'd be surprised at just what a pain in the neck this kind of stuff is to do. So yeah, she came in, she made it a great talk about how Apple has actually bothered doing a good job to sort of drag the format forward. Yeah. In terms of color and more interactive aspects to it. Thing is, though, it's still based on EPUB under the hood. I think that's a pragmatic decision. It's one of those things where, some stuff just kind of sucks, but you drag it forward anyway,
Yeah, well, I mean, every design is a bit of a compromise, and it seems to be that they took HTML5 and kind of stuffed it into ebooks as best as they could. And it was interesting to see. I mean, like a lot of companies, they have InDesign for their print magazine, and they hit the export button, and that's the ebook. But when you saw what Serenity went through to produce, I mean, she had 5 or 6 different workflows she went through to finally produce one that Macworld could use to serve EPUB, Mobi, the evolving Kindle formats. It was a lot of work, not to produce the book, but to produce the book across the insane amount of formats that we have now.
Yeah, definitely. I really don't envy her. That it seems like a Herculean task to me. I really wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right that this is, I mean, I think a lot of the iPad mini stuff where it seems like Apple is there's, I don't know the best way to put this. Apple does not lead in ebooks, and that seems irksome to Apple. And the iPad mini combined with the rumors of iBooks 3, combined with a lot of the other things that might be going on around this event, I think Apple is I don't know if they're going to hit it immediately, but I think they're building towards a very large ebooks play for the future.
I think so. I don't know if it irks them. Maybe it does. I don't know. I don't know enough about that group to really be able to say that. I just think that they like making money.
Yes.
It's like, I think if they were making more money in books than any other player, they would be perfectly happy with that, and they would just keep optimizing for making more money. I don't know if they need to necessarily agree with the... I agree. I don't think they necessarily need to gobble up the market.
No, I think they do have a bit of when there's a technology that seems substandard and not good, and they can present a better version. I think sometimes they have this idea that if they can make an impact on a market and they can improve it and make a better product and use that product to sell more of their stuff, they're highly motivated to do it.
Yeah, I agree. And what they don't do that they used to do back in the sort of 80s and 90s is that they do at least base their stuff on the prevailing standard. Yep. So the iBooks format is EPUB 3 plus a bunch of other goop. Whereas back in the day, they'd do their ADB custom serial links, and even FireWire to some extent was sort of made mostly their own thing. Yeah. They don't do that kind of thing anymore. Now they take what is generally accepted and they sort of build off of it.
I think it's a bitter reality of the market, because you look at any large company these days and whatever they own and control, they keep as locked down and proprietary as possible, whether it's Google with AdSense or Search, which is not open source, or Microsoft with their proprietary products, even Apple. But the things that you don't control, that your competitors control, you tend to fragment. So you make the WebKit and you make the thing that is free and open, so that kind of bites into their proprietary territory.
Yeah, it's that old thing about commoditizing your complement.
Yes.
Which is why apps get cheap too. But
yeah, the downside.
Yeah. Kind of stinks for us. But I mean, if you have a generally broadly accepted sort of base to build on, then you can leverage that. And it means that your not opponents, your competitors can't tie that up, for their own gain.
And closing this year's Cingleton, again in grand form, was a repeat performance by Dan Morin, but this time with the accompaniment of Lex Friedman. And they explained why Apple getting huge sucks for us, sucks for developers, sucks for users, and sucks for Apple.
Yeah, that was an interesting talk. Dan's a friend of mine, and I didn't even ask him what he was going to do. He did such a good job last year. I'm just like, you and Lex want to do something, go nuts, But they had a good back and forth, and it was funny. And it was interesting in the ways that they enumerated how Apple's sort of new 800-pound gorilla persona does kind of it changes the way we deal with the company, and it changes the way the company deals with everybody else.
But their last point was interesting, where they said it does suck, but it doesn't suck as badly as it did when Apple was small. Because at least we have better stuff now. We have better stuff to complain about than we had 10 years ago.
Right. Well, actually, 10 years ago, like, we're getting old, man. 10 years ago, things were pretty good.
Pre-iPod. Well, yeah, it's true. The iPod's 10 years old.
And the iPod, and things weren't so bad.
15 years ago. I got to go further out now.
Yeah, I know.
All right, thanks for that, Guy. I appreciate it. So, what was it like scaling Cingleton to match? I mean, you took a smallish event and you made it a little bit bigger. You had a more diverse talks. You had more diverse audience. Was that a challenge?
Yes and no. I mean, doing the first one was tough because we'd never done anything like that before. Doing the second one was a little bit easier because we kind of knew at least what we were getting into. Also, we had stuff like, we'd already had the company set up. We got our line of credit set up because you need to prepay for the hotel. There's a bunch of stuff that you need to worry about when you're putting on a conference that if you haven't done one, you probably don't necessarily think about.
Yeah.
We had more speakers. We had a different topic. I think that wasn't that much more complicated. I think, if anything, I didn't guide the speakers as much as I did the first year. And we had a broader range of topics.
Well, you had really talented people.
Yeah, exactly. When you get a guy like Michael Lock going to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody was amazing, but,
Well, Michael Lopp, let me pull that up for a second. So he pulled up a coffee table, sat 3 people down, the designer, the developer, and the dictator. And he made an excellent point about how a developer creates almost like the structure. The designer makes a human interface for it, and the dictator kind of gives it an overall direction and purpose. And then he showed examples like Apple, like WebStock, and he showed maybe where Microsoft is currently lacking the dictator, and that's why it's more hit and miss, like Xbox, yay, Zune, boo.
Right. No, he had an amazing talk. And I particularly like that he called out WebStock because we actually, that was sort of one of the prototypes that we looked at when we were putting Cingleton together, because it's such a fantastically well-run conference, and people will literally go down to New Zealand for it. So I was happy that he brought that up. But yeah, his whole sort of triad of jobs to be done, sort of thing, or roles to play in the development of a product. That it was amazing. But yeah, so I mean, I'm not going to. I wasn't going to tell Locke what to speak about. I gave him the general gist, but I'm not going to give him any notes, kind of thing. That may change next year. We may try to tighten it up a bit. And so one thing that I don't know if you've heard this week's episode of the talk show.
Yes.
In fact, I guess you were there.
I was there.
Yeah, it was just for the listeners at home. It was the one that was taped. We at the end of Cingleton, we taped a live episode of the talk show which is obviously John Gruber's show, and he was interviewing Brent Simmons. He was also at the event. Where was I going with that? Where was I going with
the
that?
Feedback, the direction, the direction, the control over the topic.
Oh, right. Thank you. Gosh, I'm so flighty. I'm still tired from last
I believe it. We'll get to that in a second, too.
Yeah. So the feedback was, so the theme that we'd set out to do was scaling and growth. And John, I think, correctly identified it as more that the talks discussed change.
Yeah.
And how to deal with it. And sort of how to roll with it, and not change that comes necessarily from within, although that was part of it, but change that is part of the environment or the ecosystem that you work in. And I think that's true, but I think that's more. I think that gets to the root of what really Cingleton is about. It's about, okay, here's a change that we need to deal with or that we foresee coming. How do we address it? So I think next year, again, it'll be something that's effectively a change, and we'll have a specific sort of change in mind. But ultimately, how do we deal with change is sort of the question that Cingleton sort of sets out to answer. Not answer, but discuss is a better word.
That's what I really like about it, because you pick a topic like that and then you crowdsource it, but with a very focused crowd. So you end up getting very high quality, well thought out, diverse and interesting discussion in a really community, like the Apple community for the Apple community sort of way.
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, that's the goal. We don't want to grow it anymore. I'm just seeing in the chat room. I'm not actually logged in, so I can't type to anybody. And but Sock Rollett was saying that we should keep Cingleton, shouldn't get too much bigger.
Yeah.
And I agree. I don't think we'll scale it much more than what we've got now, which is positive. You know, there's good and bad things to that. We'd love to have it, you know, in a way, we'd love to have everybody attend.
Yeah.
It would be, but it would be a totally different thing.
Well, Thomas would be live casting rather than recording.
Right. Exactly. Thomas would go crazy. Yeah. Thomas is the guy who does all our AV and design and stuff for the conference. He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah, who's awesome.
Yeah, he's a good guy. What we do try to do is make sure that we have interesting people speak, make sure that we have some interesting attendees. And the idea is to get the videos out for free for everybody.
And you can see last year's already. If you go to the Cingleton page on Vimeo, they're all there. Yes.
Yeah. We should probably do a better job promoting that a bit. One thing we do fall down on, I think, is, especially this year, is sort of promotion or more accurately communicating to people. So what we did is we sent out an email to all of last year's attendees asking if they'd like to buy another ticket for this year. We brought back all of except AJ, who couldn't make it, but we invited all of last year's speakers back. We had our own this year's speakers, and we invited anybody that had signed up on our website by just putting in their email address. Mm-hmm. And that was it. We were sold out in like no time. So we didn't put a decent web page up that really explained what was going on. So
well, it's not bad, because you might end up like WWDC disappointing, thousands of people who just can't get there in time.
Yeah, I really don't know what to do about that. We have a limited number of spots and a demand, even when we're not trying to sort of get out there, that sort of overwhelms the number of spots. So
you move it to February, you have it at the Ice Hotel, and then only the hardiest will show up.
You know what? We've actually thought about doing one in the winter just to torture the Americans.
I think it'd be fantastic. We'll show up in sweaters. It'll be great.
Yeah, right. Sometime in February or March or something. It could be fun.
The thing I liked is I got very little sleep at Cingleton, and you got even less than I did. And not a single one of those talks, every one of those talks kept me at the edge of my seat, wide awake, incredibly engaged and interested. And that doesn't happen at a lot of conferences. So I think you deserve a lot of credit for the programming that went into the event.
Thanks. I mean, it was almost like I don't like the term, but like a sort of a fire and forget kind of thing. I invited some great people, and we're so lucky that so many of the people wanted to speak.
Yeah.
That once we kind of lined it all up, they just did a terrific job.
So, you didn't get a chance to talk about Scaling Guy. You were so busy getting everyone else to talk about it. You didn't. And I'm actually interested in some of your thoughts on it. And the first one that strikes me is Apple, because we saw in previous years, for example, when the original version of iOS was coming out, Apple pulled people off the Leopard team to get it done in time. Mm-hmm. But if you look at what they're putting out this year, their sheer amount of product Apple's releasing in 2012 could stun a large cadre of oxen. I don't know if they're fraying around the edges to do it, but their ability to project product this year, I think, is unprecedented.
Yeah, they do that, as is frequently mentioned. They do that TikTok development style. And right now we're definitely on which one's which? I don't know.
The talk, I think, is a big one.
Okay, so we're on the tick. Whichever one is the the Rev version.
Yeah.
I think Mountain Lion was effectively a Rev on Lion. To be frank, I think Mountain Lion is what Lion should have been, but whatever. I think iOS 6, it did a lot of stuff behind the scenes, but mostly it was like, let's get rid of Google.
Yeah.
So, that's a tick issue. So maybe that's why they could pull it off. I don't know how they managed to pull it off. I mean, it's one of the things that I worry about Apple is that I think that they are going to run their guys and girls, and that I just mean developers, ragged eventually. I don't know when, but I don't think you can keep going at 100 miles per hour all the time. And one thing that does bug me is that often it comes up just how much money they have in the bank.
Yeah.
That doesn't solve anything. You can't just hire random monkeys. You can't feel like, there's a lot of constraints.
Yeah. That solves the empty bank problem, but nothing else.
Right. It's no, you can't just throw money at every problem and see it get fixed. You can throw money at a lot of problems to see them get fixed. Like, I think a lot of their supply chain sort of works like that, but you can't just do that for every problem.
But even then, I mean, there's a cost. The more you scale, which is an interesting scaling issue in itself, being really small is relatively easy. Being middle size is destroy. It's just like very few companies survive the turbulence that it takes to go from being small to being big. And then when you go to be really big, it's incredibly hard because the more you add, the more overhead comes with it. So if you add a programmer, you don't get an additional programmer because part of that goes off to managing and teamwork and assigning, and it's almost like the laws of physics. The closer you get to light speed, the more and more mass you build up, making it harder and harder to go faster.
That's a good analogy. I mean, it's the mythical man month.
Yes,
classic thing where you can't just throw bodies at stuff. And the other thing is the what was I going to say? Like the army is like the military in general. I forget. It's like 80% logistics.
Yep.
Like there's a very small number of people that actually.
Well, historically, feeding an army is really difficult.
Exactly. Yeah. Like a good. The army is mostly a logistical machine in order to get. I don't really like the analogy because I'm not a big fan of killing people, but you know where I'm going with.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. And I mean, Apple is doing all they can. They're building a new giant, I believe, spaceship as a headquarters just to be able to put the bodies that they're trying to accumulate in a sane place. I mean, they don't even have room to stack, pack, and rack all the people they have now, let alone try to find other people in a competitive environment where Google and Microsoft and everybody else and every startup, frankly, I mean, previously, you might have said this to Cingleton, but previously, if you wanted to program for Objective-C, you worked at Apple. And now if you want to program for Objective-C, you have tons of opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's actually... in that piece that we've discussed a couple of times, one of the things that I see being problematic for Apple is retention of employees. At a certain point, I know for a fact that many of them, there's teams that work in a hallway.
Yeah,
so that's not good. And I think the spaceship's going to fix a few things, or at least help them grow out a little bit more. But if you've been run ragged on iOS for a few years now, and really the platform has sort of been defined. Mm-hmm. So maybe the exciting phase is gone. And your stock options are starting to vest because it's been like 5 years and you're rich now because, the stock price is going crazy.
It's not bad.
Yeah, exactly. I think there could be more interesting pastures to move to eventually for some people. And I think that's a risk for Apple, is trying to hold on to people. So I listened to, after you told me this, I went back and listened to that Ryan Block discussion you had.
Okay.
I think it was him that was, what was he saying? Oh yeah, it was like a Mansfield. Like Mansfield wanted to leave and then they just threw money at him until he stayed.
That's the rumor. The rumor was that he's vice president now in charge of, I have no responsibilities here whatsoever.
So I hadn't heard that at all until I listened to that episode originally. But I think that's probably something that's going to go on across the board within the next couple of years. And I think they're going to have to try to keep some good people.
Well, I mean, those people all, and I think we discussed this before, but those people all came with Steve Jobs from Next. Mm-hmm. Tim Cook was not at Next. Tim Cook came from Compaq HP. So it's almost like, that was a little cadre of people that had worked very closely, very well together for many, many years. And they are now incredibly wealthy. They have spent a lot of time creating magnificent things. And at a certain point, you maybe want a life. Yeah, no, I agree. And I certainly think it's true for them, but I don't think it's limited to them. I think there's a lot of people in the company that have worked on important stuff that may be looking to. And I don't actually know anything. I'm just saying, like, if it was me, and I've been working my ass off for like 7-8 years now, given the dev time before launch. Yeah, I may be ready to find something else. Well, we've seen it. I mean, Lauren Brichter worked on the original iPhone. He went on to make Tweety, and now he's working on other projects. And he's not the only one. There's a lot of really well-known people. Mike Drewitz was at Apple, and now he's at Black Pixel. Yeah. I mean, there's an incredible allure to being. Some people just like to be doing the new thing. Once the new thing is done, they want to do the next thing, not necessarily keep working on the new thing or the now new old thing.
Right, exactly.
And you said that very well. I mean, you made a good point in your article, and I'll put it in the link list at the end, that people working on the original iPhone, that was 2007. People who worked on iOS 2, that was 2008. That's a long time ago. Maybe iCloud was another big thing, but the tick releases may not be as interesting for them as the talk releases.
Right. Yeah.
Another thing that was interesting is you're a Mac developer. Well, you've developed all sorts of platforms, but you're currently working on a Mac app, and now you have the Mac App Store, which can provide exposure at an unprecedented scale, but it also comes with requirements like sandboxing. If you want to use synchronizing, you have iCloud, and that seems to me to put more demands on you as a developer.
Yeah, so that's an interesting, like, just for the listeners, like we traded some notes back and forth before the show went on, and I've been thinking about this one quite a bit. I think you're right in that there are new requirements and there's new stuff that as a Mac developer you need to worry about. I think if you're porting an older app into the new world, that is exceedingly problematic.
Yeah,
because you haven't designed for sandboxing or you haven't thought about iCloud. If you're doing a new app, it's stuff you need to worry about, but it's not the end of the world, because at least you don't have a shipping application that's designed to function in one manner that can no longer work in that manner. There's a lot of apps that just can't fit into sandboxing, like Paul Kim's, like Noodlesoft's Hazel, or Manton Reese's, oh God, I'm going to blank on the name. Manton's going to be mad at me. Sorry, Manton. It manages video clips.
Yeah.
Can't believe I forget it. Anyway.
I'll dub it in after.
Yeah, thank you. With like a Starbucks voice, just clearly not me. Clip. Oh, Christ. Anyway, sorry. But the review time is bad.
Yes.
Now, so I've, I used to work in games, as I think we've discussed, and when you're shipping for a console, you have this idea of, you submit it to the console developer and they okay it or not, and then eventually it goes into production and then ships. Now that's one thing. And you pay a bunch of money, but they give you back like an itemized list of exactly what you need to change. For the Mac App Store, review times have gone they're like a month long.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they don't give you anything back. It's not like you're getting anything out of it. So you submit, and then you can't get your app out for a month. And if you get rejected, you get rejected at the end of the month, and they give you some vague reason, and then you got to submit, and you got to spend a month again. So that is very, very problematic. And I don't know what they're going to do about
it. It reminds me like a sci-fi movie where there's a wormhole that only opens once a month, and you get to shove something into it quickly, and then you wait, and a month later the door opens again and a brick hits you in the head with, either a green or a red sticker on it. Pretty much. Yeah, it's that. That's a problem. I mean, that's
again, that's a scaling issue. I think probably everyone got moved on to iOS because the new iOS build, but I don't know. And
but it seems like if you're using Sandbox or you're using iCloud, the process they go through to test your app is even longer. So I don't want to say you're penalized for doing things the way Apple wants you to do them, but it seems like you're almost penalized for doing things the way Apple wants you to do them.
Yeah, you're certainly not rewarded. That's for sure. Now, so one thing is, I mean, it's a little bit weird because, I mean, so if you got a new app, let's just say sandboxing in iCloud isn't an issue in terms of design and development. And let's just say that for the sake of argument. Review time is something that can be fixed on their end. Clip start. Thank you. I just saw that in the chat. Clip start. Review time is something that can be fixed on their end, and I don't think it's intrinsic to the problem.
Yeah.
So it used to be, if you were an independent Mac developer, you would have a very high initial startup cost for your company as you set up sort of your website. Your online store is a big one, and figuring out all the payment processing and all of that. So the Mac App Store gets rid of that. So in a way, I mean, is it getting harder to be an Apple, like a Mac developer? I don't necessarily think so. I just think that the transition process is very costly for established players. And since the most, I guess, respected voices or the most heard voices are the established players, that's kind of the conversation that ends up happening a lot.
Yeah, they have to, like Jurowitz said, they have to radically alter their conceptions of what kind of software they can ship in that model.
Exactly. Yeah. Which, getting back to Cingleton is kind of what we aim to help people do, is like, not in any technical specific way, but I mean, in at least understanding that change is happening and how to deal with it in some way or the other. I think one thing that does get a little bit touchy is that Apple has frequently been changing the requirements. Like they've been adding sandboxing, they've been adding iCloud, they've been adding X or adding Y or full screen or whatever have you had. So each year, because I'm on a yearly development cycle now, each year there's one new thing that every Mac developer sort of has to adopt in some way. That gets not tiresome, but I mean that
it does. It's wearying.
Yeah, because you end up taking time to develop your app to suit where Apple wants to go, rather than the sort of plan that you have for your application.
Yeah, absolutely. Your roadmap and your development plan has to, in some way, because Apple is bifurcating their strategy now. They're putting out a big release, then a small release. So they're going yearly instead of, previously OS X at least was every couple of years, maybe longer. And now they're kind of splitting that up. They're doing as much as they did before, but they're doing it more frequently, smaller steps. And for example, you want to ship software. Do you ship it with the new stuff? Do you wait for the new thing? You're no longer in control exactly of your cycle.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So, and a year it's not that long a time, right? I mean, because of the way sort of indie software works is you basically support the current operating system minus one or two. Mm-hmm. And if Apple introduces a new feature that you need to support, say iCloud or sandboxing, it becomes hard for you to write it so that it can match those requirements while still supporting your previous customers back at least one operating system. So it gets touchy. Apple, I mean, the good thing is Apple's moving really quickly.
Yeah.
But bad thing is that they're big and they know where they're going. And I'll just use the word we are small and don't know where Apple's going. Therefore, there's a lot of scrambling on the indie front.
Well, it's a moving target. That's always challenging to hit. But I think the nice thing about Apple is that for a long time, Microsoft and Google has that now. They were a giant under whose feet you did business, but they were a drunken, unpredictable giant. Like you never knew when Google would release a product that would obliterate your business, or when Microsoft would buy you or your rival or your business. And Apple at least seems to walk in fairly, like they will sway once in a while, but they tend to walk in fairly straight lines. So if you're doing business under their feet, you will get stepped on. But if you stay to the side, you're a little safer.
I think so. I mean, I think a lot of my indie pals would sort of disagree with that assertion. A lot of the restrictions on the App Store seem sort of arbitrary at times. Like I know Rogue Amoeba's had some weird problems where, like we had one thing we did is we had airfoil speakers would receive audio from the Mac that we broadcast, and we asked the Mac to send an image of itself, like when you see it in the Finder, and we would replace the screen with the screenshot of what was on the Mac. So on your iPhone, you'd see like, here's my Mac and here's what's on the screen and here's what I'm listening to. Which was cute. It was a nice, pretty fun feature that I actually had fun implementing, and that got us banned. Well, it got them banned from the App Store because we were using like an Apple image.
Yeah, it happens with book covers too.
Yeah, I'm sure. So it's like, a lot of it's arbitrary. Microsoft was bad, but I mean, I developed for their OS for a long time for game companies. And yeah, if you got big, they may buy you, and they were kind of the evil empire kind of thing. But in some ways, Apple's small little the ways that Apple is arbitrary in small ways can really sort of sting independent developers.
Yeah.
So if it takes a month to review an app, that's a month that, let's say I'm ready to ship my app, and then I give it to Apple, and then it takes a month to review it. That's a month that I'm not getting money for. That's like 1/12 of my potential revenue for the year.
Yeah. And that's if it gets accepted after that month and not rejected and waiting another month. Then
exactly. Yeah. And like I said, that can get fixed, but it's the small little things that aren't really that big a deal that do can add up and like sort of sting an independent developer.
No, I think that's absolutely true. I think the big things we anticipate, we plan for, but it's usually the little things that wear you down. It's like mountains and mountains of little things are what kill you in the end.
Right. So I think, I've not been incredibly surprised by most of the big moves that Apple makes. I don't think if you watched Apple a lot, you can be really that shocked. Yeah. I think sandboxing was a given. I think the Mac App Store was sort of obviously going to come. Even this iPad Mini seems like a given. Even if we didn't know stuff or hadn't heard so many rumors, it wouldn't be that surprising that they released something. So the general direction of Apple, I think, is relatively easily understood, which I think is like the kind of, to me, that's basically what Daring Fireball says constantly. He's like, why are you surprised by this? This is how Apple thinks.
Nothing has changed.
Yeah, get over it. Like, this is not a crazy new thing. So that's relatively easy to plan for. I think Mark Orman says that again over and over on his talk show, like that. Build and analyze. You can plan for that. You can anticipate it. It's the little things that kind of get you, and the little things. The more the developers are closely tied to their platform, which is going to be a nice segue for getting into the Tweetbot stuff.
Yeah.
The more developers are closely tied to their platform, the more the little decisions can really trip them up.
Well, you have dependencies, right? And the more dependencies you have on, the more vulnerable you are to disruptions in those dependencies. And that's exactly Tweetbot for Mac. They were in the middle of developing it. Twitter creates new rules for the road. They suddenly limit you to 100,000 tokens or double the amount of tokens you had when the limitation goes into effect. And suddenly the ability to use Twitter is scarce, a commodity. And I joked about this before, but you're going to have Twitter tokens, like you're going to line up for Twitter tokens like bread lines or try to smuggle them across the border. So they reacted. And this is an interesting point too. They reacted by charging $20 for the Mac app, recognizing that their audience was artificially limited. Their ability to scale now, just like Apple maybe controls it a little bit with the Mac App Store, is being controlled by Twitter on the API side.
Yeah. So I discussed the Tweetbot for Mac pricing. It's $20 for the Twitter client right now for the Mac. I talked about it with a couple of developer friends. Most people, or whatever, like a lot of people think that, $20 is
it's nothing.
Fair price.
Yeah, it's
like it used to be before the Mac App Store. You would not blink at $20.
Yeah,
$20 was the minimum. Like I think Panic at one point was selling a couple of sort of like cute little apps. I think they called them little apps for what, $12, $15, and I think they just stopped doing it because it just wasn't worth their time.
Tweety for Mac was, I forget, but it was close to $20 when it launched too.
Right, like $20 was a low end price point. The Mac App Store, or the app stores in general, have sort of distorted that down to the low end thanks to the race to the bottom stuff. But so it's kind of frustrating to a lot of people that $20 is seen as like something that needs to be explained away.
Yeah.
But that's what Tapbot said, so it's kind of hard to argue. I mean, if they say that their rationale, I think I've got their blog right here. They say they charged a little more than they wanted to,
which could mean 20 instead of 15.
Yeah, it could mean that, but I mean, or I don't know. So I don't actually know these guys personally, so I can't ask them. And if I did, I wouldn't tell you anyway. But I don't know what they would have charged if it wasn't for this Twitter thing. Like maybe it's an excuse. I don't know. Maybe. But
they shouldn't need an excuse, I think, was the greater point.
I think that's it. I mean, and Jury gave this talk about appropriately pricing your software anyway, and I think $20 is a fair price for.
I mean, I use Tweetbot for Mac. I've been using it. I started it with the alpha. I use it 8+ hours a day, every day. And to think I'm going to complain about $20 for a license for that for the rest of my whatever life is insane to me.
I don't mean to make that sound like Ritchie Rich, just $20 is nothing. Yeah. But I mean, there's a lot of care and effort went into that.
Yeah.
So you are right that Twitter, and they are right, that Twitter has sort of created an artificial scarcity in terms of the token limits. So this app, Tweetbot for Mac, has a maximum possible revenue. Mm-hmm. And good for them, good for Tapbots. They want to be able to keep supporting Tweetbot after they've run out of their ability to sell it, which I think is totally commendable. Therefore, they want to get more money, or as much money as they can, so they can keep paying for the support costs, which aren't trivial. Support takes quite a bit of time.
And people who really want it are the ones who are going to use it and will pay this. But if it was really cheap, then people might buy it, kick the tires, leave it, and someone else can no longer buy that slot anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So it makes it difficult. And it's working out for them. I mean, I think they're still in the top 5 revenue for Mac App Store. And
the interesting parallels, the things that were disturbing to me was the pressure that Apple puts on apps. So, I mean, the iWork apps for Mac are $20, and those are non-trivial apps. But the one that killed me the most were people saying they're charging the same as Mountain Lion. They're charging me what my entire OS costs, without mentioning that OS is massively subsidized by hardware profits.
Right. Again, Apple is a hardware company.
Yeah.
Well, so that's too simplistic to say. But
their profit model is based on hardware, primarily.
Thank you. Exactly. Yeah. Like they got like 30% margin on hardware. I don't know what that margin is on Mac OS updates, but it's probably not that much.
No, neither is iTunes. Everything else is basically run at just over break even.
It's free, right?
Yeah.
I personally like that they charge so little for OS updates, because I would rather write to the most recent OS, because it's often just better, or bugs are fixed, or there's features I want to use.
So, or like Brent says, you can throw out code.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm good with that. What I'm not good with is, I guess, users mistaking the fact that just because the OS is affordable means that all software of lesser complexity should be scaled accordingly. I was talking to, I believe it was Paul Kafasis about this. I think if he listens and I screw up his position, sorry. But I think at this point the OS should just be free. Make it free or make it cost money. Don't, like, somewhere in the middle like this, where it's in the ground, where applications butt up against it.
Yes.
Gives this weird sort of distortion to what other apps are the value of other apps, or at least what pricing of other apps should be.
It puts, it's almost like grading on a curve and not in a very beneficial way.
Right. It's a little weird. It's like you can't be making much money selling it at, what is it, $20-$30 a pop? I don't know.
And iOS updates have been free. I mean, iPod Touch updates were originally charged, but even those are free now. I think that's a much saner model.
Some weird US accounting crap, as far as I can tell.
Well, it was Apple's interpretation of Sarbanes-Oxley. I don't know if not everyone agreed with it, but it was one Apple stuck to.
Well, they're in some ways they're pretty conservative.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the $1 something airport, what was it? Airport N update.
Right, that was hilarious.
It looked good on the books. It was good. Yeah.
No, that's weird, but I get it. I mean, whatever. But yeah, so at a certain point, it's maybe just give OS 10 away. And I'm not saying that to be like it's got no value. I think it's got more than a $20 value, but it just gets a little weird. Like they're in this weird gray zone now where they're less expensive than, let's say, OmniGraffle.
Yeah, absolutely. They're less expensive than half their own apps in the store. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That brings me to this article that you wrote, the one that I've been referencing quite often here, and it was called "The Three Things That Should Trouble Apple." But I think there's a fourth thing that you actually mentioned right up the top that particularly hit home for me. And I've told you this personally, but it had a profound effect on me. It actually changed the way that I blogged. And what you said basically was, and I'm going to quote you here because I'll get it wrong if I don't. I believe that many Apple observers have been too invested in picking off the low-hanging fruit of obviously out-of-touch commenters, columnists, and analysts. Apple is winning. It's fun to pick on the idiots, and we do tune in for the affirmation that engenders. But that's not insight. It's a tag team wedgie patrol. It takes a clever intellect to dismantle bullshit, but ultimately it often just ends up with pantsing the dumb guy. Rather than doing that, let's aim to pants the A-grade quarterback. And I think that was one of the best insights into modern Apple blogging that I've read in a long time.
Thank you. That's flattering because I really like your stuff. So it's kind of you to say. And you really like that pantsing thing. You say that out to me all the time.
Well, the original time we were on the show, I wanted to name it that show, and I forgot to bring it up, and that has bothered me since then. So I wanted to make sure I didn't forget this time, so I put it everywhere that I could possibly see it while we were recording the show.
Oh, thank you. I'm trying to figure out what exactly I was trying to say, but I mean, I said what I wanted to say, but I'm trying to come up with a different way of saying it. I think there's a lot of really, really smart people that make that comment on the state of Apple and the state of the industry at large, and I think a lot of that effort goes into sort of tearing down stupid arguments.
Yeah,
like we were saying, or like I said earlier about Daring Fireball. Where it's predicting how Apple will move, and it should be obvious because I mean it's really not that. The specifics are hard to discern, but I mean the general gist of it is not.
They're secretive but logical.
Right. You don't necessarily know what products they're going to release or when they're going to do it or the specifics of anything. But the way they approach the world is not a surprise.
Yeah.
I mean, they ship, they ship a phone every year, ship an iPad every year. It's around the same time. They generally try to vertically integrate.
Yep.
They're secretive, and they address problems. Let's say with the Maps thing, they shut up until they have something to say.
Yep.
And then they say it.
They're incredibly methodical.
Right. I mean, it's not.
They're not coming out on stage and saying, "This year it's yo-yos."
Yeah, they're not all over the map. They're very, very directed. Yeah. They're very disciplined, and it's just not a shock.
Yeah, so they're not a throw everything at the wall and see what sticks kind of company.
Exactly. So I think a lot of brain power goes into sort of pointing out how stupid or other commentators would be, and a lot of it has to do with link baiting, or maybe they just don't get it, or these commentators expect something different from technology, or they're wired, or technology companies, or they're wired into a worldview from a previous decade. And I think I'd like to see more of that brain power turned on to analyzing Apple and what's going wrong with it, rather than just what's going right with it.
It's like you want to turn your Syracuse laser beam towards the optimal target.
Yeah, and you know what? Syracuse does that. That's what makes Syracuse. He's very focused on sort of complaining about Apple.
But I understand your point. I wouldn't speak for you by any stretch of the imagination. But what I got from that is that it was basically a challenge to raise the level of discourse surrounding Apple. That it's fun to make it's fun to make fun of the bad guy, but maybe not the bad guy. I don't know the right word for it. But there are some people who deliberately write link bait, and if you link to it, you have taken that bait, reaffirmed their business model, and encouraged them to do more. And looking at sometimes the way that even Twitter goes, we listen to our lesser angels and reward the negative attention seekers when there's so much excellent Apple commentary and really good ideas out there that don't get the attention because it's around that black hole of, maybe John's word, claim chowder is the right one for it.
Yeah. You know what? That wasn't John's word originally. It was Cable or one of those Panic guys.
We'll credit Cable.
I don't like to give that guy any more credit than such an asshole, that guy. I'm kidding. Yeah, I mean, so I say, I'm looking at my own post, which is kind of silly maybe, but I do say that it ends up with pantsing the dumb guy. And I don't necessarily mean the dumb guy because, like you said, it's not necessarily a stupid position.
It's highly profitable sometimes.
Necessarily understand the way Apple works, or it's maybe it's shrewd. Maybe it's just shrewd business where you're just trying to make some money off of it. But I'd really like to know what people think are the failings of Apple, or what's likely to fall apart. Because I think ultimately that's, if you're an Apple watcher, I think that's, or, an Apple aficionado or somebody in the community, isn't that more worthwhile?
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned content in your article.
Winning. Sorry?
You mentioned content in your article that you still can't sit down in front of your Apple TV and watch what you want when you want, regardless of how much you're willing to pay for it.
Right. Which I think if somebody makes that happen, I will be using them.
Yeah.
Like there's not even I'll happily pay money. I will happily pay money to watch stuff. And I realize that that's not necessarily a universal truth, because people only have so much entertainment money to spend. But whoever can aggregate television and movies and sort of that kind of entertainment into one place, however they do it, I think is going to win a huge audience.
I agree.
And I don't think Apple is doing it. Not for lack of trying. I do think the media companies are being obtuse and probably blocking any sort of progress on that.
They don't want the problem solved.
Right. So, but before iTunes existed, the media companies were mostly trying to work with Microsoft and a bunch of, get all that DRM and all that kind of crazy stuff going. But they took a risk going with Apple because the iPod and iTunes were limited to the Mac at the time.
Yep.
And it was a small market that they could take a risk on. And I think if a company can come along that manages to get that upper hand by virtue of it being a limited risk, I think maybe a lot of media companies will try it out. And I think Apple has shown itself to these guys to be sort of a player that will come in and dominate the market, take the market away from them effectively. Not take the market away from them, but be the dominant middleman.
They'll make it successful in a way that doesn't necessarily please the people involved.
Exactly, yeah. They'll be able to call the shots because they'll be the distributor. The sole distributor in many cases. Maybe that's a bit much, but whatever. Certainly one of the major distributors.
Yeah.
And I think if there's anything new or any sort of new approach to be tried with this, I don't think they'll necessarily go with Apple. I think they'll probably do it with somebody smaller because they are now scared of Apple.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. And I think that's kind of a nice segue into Marco's new thing, which is not doing television per se, but he took a look at the market for writing on the internet and the various models involved. And he wasn't necessarily happy with it. So someone who was incredibly skilled, who had experience in making Instapaper, running web services, had contacts who were writers, friends who were writers, he came out with the magazine, and you, sir, were in the debut issue.
I was like super touched when not touched. I was almost embarrassed that he asked me to write for his thing. I thought that was amazing. He when he started, he pinged me to ask about would I pay for basically the magazine.
Yeah.
Like, and we chatted with that. And then he asked me to write for it, and I was like, I'm blown away. Because I don't consider myself much of a writer. I mean, if you look at the articles I write, there's like maybe one a month, not even. Like I don't particularly do it.
That's quantity, not quality, guy.
Well, I think you pump out a lot of very high quality stuff on a regular basis because you're professional about it.
I don't have to code in between articles like you guys.
Yeah, I mean, there's a professional approach to doing stuff where you can sit down and so like a lot of the times I don't write something because I've read what most other people have said, and like I got nothing real to add, so I'm not going to say anything. I only ever really write an article when I'm like, I don't think this got covered very well. But just to get back to the magazine, just for the listeners who haven't heard about this, and they really should have. It's Marco Arment's new app. It's, I believe the download's free.
Yep.
And the subscription is $1.99 a month.
Yeah, and you get a week for free.
You get a week free, so you get to read all the articles. There's 4 articles. There's one by myself. There's one by Jason Snell about technology and baseball. There's one by Michael Lopp. Mm-hmm. And there's
who's Rands and Repose, if people aren't familiar.
He was Rands and Repose, who's always worth reading.
Yeah.
And there's a great article. I personally, it's my favorite one, by Alex Payne. Mm-hmm. I don't actually know him. I think I met him at C4 like once years ago. But it's a very, very well written article, and I think it's very timeless. And what the thing about my piece in the magazine was titled Fireball, and it was about how different revenue structures affect the output for a specific blog or a specific method of writing. And we've talked about this quite a bit because you've come up with more. Like I managed to miss a bunch. Not only did I manage to miss a bunch, I kind of pissed off Anil Dash.
That's not always the worst thing.
No. I mean, he's a smart guy.
He is.
But because he called me on something that was true. Like, and you pointed out, I think, last time we were on the show, I think you'd already read the piece that was going to be in the magazine, but yeah. Kottke basically pioneered what Daring Fireball does as a revenue stream.
I'm sure if you go back far enough, Weiner did it at some point.
Oh, Dave Weiner did everything first. Yeah. It doesn't count. It's like dinosaurs are looking at Dave Weiner being like, oh, man, he totally beat us to that like eating animals thing. So I mean, I wrote from the perspective of what a piece that I would have written on my blog, and in fact, it was a piece for Kicking Bear First that I adapted for the magazine because I thought it would fit better. Plus, I got paid, which is nice.
Yeah, which is an important part of Marco's model.
Yeah. I'll get back to that. First time I ever got paid for writing, so nice. I felt really good about that. Yeah, I don't run any ads or anything on my site. So the idea was that the sort of the Daring Fireball model, where you have a linked list every day to sort of keep attention, and occasionally you write a longer piece, and you bookend it with sponsorships.
Yeah.
I think that encourages one kind of writing, which is basically you've got to be active every day linking stuff. I don't think it necessarily encourages longer pieces because there's not that much reward. You want to keep people coming back. The other sort of major one was I don't want to say link baiting, but it's like a page view model.
Yeah.
Where that sort of encourages more sensationalistic headlines.
Yeah.
And sort of, like the link bait stuff. Not all the time. I don't think you guys do it. There's a lot of good sites that don't.
We try to do help content because we think that might be as valuable as link bait, but it's not always as sexy. Like, people usually have problems, and if we can solve those problems, that generates a lot of interest. This, I don't know, again, it's not as loud as link baiting, but I think it can be as voluminous over time.
See, here's the thing. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Like, I'm not in the publishing industry in any way, but that makes a lot of sense, and I kind of wish I had thought about that. I'm more approaching this as an interested outsider.
Yeah.
Because I know Macworld does a bunch of stuff with help books.
Yep.
In fact, Sanity's talk was a lot about publishing ebooks for help subjects.
And Macworld also not very link baity.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Well, it goes back to your model. I mean, the link bait is the easier way of. I mean, you can definitely generate a lot of page views very quickly if you want to go that way. It's a lot more work to do the other one.
So, I mean, it's almost a shame that link bait is a derogatory term, because it's almost like a help book would be link bait.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's encouraging
people. It's like, do you want to know how to do this? Here you go. Here's a link to it. Yeah. Anyway, this is such a rich field that
it's a really interesting one, though. I mean, at least to me, because as much as I write, I'm also a reader of everyone else's site. So I mean, I try to get both perspectives in.
Right. Yeah. So Marco's new thing, the magazine, has sort of this new. It's a new model in terms of the way writing for internet distribution, I guess, is done. But it's really old, and then it's like super basic, where you write something, and then he pays you for it.
Yeah. He's an editor, a publisher with paid writers.
Yeah. It's the most basic thing, and because there's a lag between when you write the piece and when it actually gets published, and because you get to you retain the rights to the piece, and you can publish it 30 days after Marco has published it in the magazine. You can put it on your blog or do whatever you want with it. It encourages writers to write pieces that are more timeless.
Yeah.
It's not about reacting to the news. It's not necessarily about taking a pot shot at something stupid Henry Blodgett said.
Arguably, that's timeless, but we won't get into it.
I don't know why I pick on him all the time. I don't know.
But he engenders it. I mean, like, that's his purpose, and you're.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, I think he
makes no secret of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think he makes. I think that's the way he makes money.
Yep.
He does the link blog thing, and it works really well for Business Insider, and you know, that's their thing. Famously, who's the other guy? John Dvorak.
Yes.
Basically made a career out of trolling Mac users.
Yes, absolutely.
In a lot of ways, you know.
And he would say that, and it would still work, which is the amazing thing.
I actually, after he came out and said that, I gained respect for him for the first since like 1983.
Oh, he's in on. It's like William Shatner in The Practice. He's in on the joke.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, no, but I think the model is important. The monetization, for lack of a better word, monetization model for writing is important in terms of the pressures that it creates on the content that will be produced. And I think the magazine has an interesting one in that it's super old school.
Yep.
And encourages writing from. I mean, I think the term Marco uses is geeks, but nerds, whatever.
Yeah.
Right? Like tech writers, not necessarily writing about tech, but writing about things that would interest the sort of the greater geek culture.
By technologists for technologists.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it. But writing articles that are more timeless and that have a broader scope in terms of what they're actually trying to address. And I think he nailed it in the first issue. I think there's a bunch of really great articles in there.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean there's so many parallels. If you go back to the App Store for a minute, the link bait is almost the in-app purchase pseudo gambling app where you stick it in there, people can buy stuff. It's a very easy app to make, and it's maybe not as difficult as some of the really deep apps that don't get as much attention. So I think there's like a lot of parallels in the community from media to design to the implementation.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that for sure.
So sort of the last thing I wanted to touch on was Apple's got a media event coming up on Tuesday. It's probably going to be iPad. It's probably going to be Mac. Apple used to be a computer company. Now, by revenue at least, Apple is a mobile company. Yet there might, it depends, I guess, if you quantify laptops, as Apple has in the past said they're the biggest mobile company in the world because laptops are portable, which was so you can defend that. What do you think of this sort of mix where we're getting the cars that are the iPads and Apple is still moving their trucks, their computers into Retina, into newer technologies like SSD at the same time?
Yeah, I think you talked with Jim about this a little bit last week. First of all, I think they should be giving you invites because that's kind of stupid that they're not. So if anybody's listening, give Rene an invite.
Oh, thank you.
I don't think Apple's a mobile company. I don't think they're a computer company. I think they make products. I think they like to. I don't know how to put my finger on this specifically, but the iPod wasn't a computer.
No,
and it wasn't mobile. I mean, you could carry it, but that's not what it was. They used technology to solve a problem.
Yeah,
and I think that's at its heart. I think that's what Apple does. I don't think they're, and you've said this many times, that Apple doesn't confuse its products with its company.
Yeah,
which is sort of, and I think you say this every time too, which is typically what Microsoft does.
Yeah.
So I'm totally stealing your smart page.
It's yours.
So you can't use it on me.
They're solving problems, and the problems are increasingly mobile.
Exactly. Will they keep shipping Macs? Yeah, I think so. Will they move to ARM on the desktop? Maybe, but if they do, it'll be one of those 64-bit ARM chips, and it'll look effectively like OS 10.
Yeah.
And by desktop, I mean I basically mean laptops. I don't know what to predict for that kind of stuff because, so I used to think about that a lot, like trying to predict like where crap's gonna go, and increasingly I've realized that that's just not how you do things. And I think Jobs said this maybe at a All Things D conference where I think Kara Swisher asked him and Gates about where things were going to be in 5 years. And Gates had a pretty long and detailed answer about probably natural user interface because that's his thing, like you could talk to it, you could gesture, you could do all this kind of stuff. And then the question went to Jobs, and he said, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's the truth. I think they just keep trying stuff. I think they try to figure out what can and can't be done, what problems can and can't be solved. And I think they try a bunch of stuff that they throw away. So what was your question? Will they keep shipping trucks? Yes. We need trucks. They need trucks to build iPhone stuff. Until they don't need trucks, or until we don't have a use for it, then yeah, I really do think they'll keep up with it. By revenue share, are they a mobile company? Yeah, but I think that's I kind of think that's a mistake to look at it that way. I think that's sort of a traditionalist view. I think if they could come up with something that would just cannibalize iOS tomorrow and make them even more money, or solve the problem in a more elegant way, I'd like to think that they would do it. There's that whole, Steve ain't there anymore kind of thing, which maybe that's a factor. But traditionally, they have sort of done it. I mean, iOS. There's a reason that Windows 8 has that crazy shell environment in it, right? Even on the tablets, the Surface tablets. And there's a reason why iOS has nothing to do with OS X.
Yeah.
And it's because they're perfectly willing to effectively marginalize their most successful product at the time.
It's
the Mac.
kill your darlings writ across a product line.
Yeah, well, more than a product line, it's kill your darlings writ across the culture of the company.
Yes.
They had when iOS shipped, there was far more people on the Mac or invested in the Mac than on iOS. And they shipped it, and they shipped, the next year or whenever it was, 2.0, they shipped a platform that was new, and it radically changed the way not radically, but it changed the way that you program for Apple devices from AppKit to UIKit. And they didn't hesitate.
Yeah, they were fearless almost.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if they were fearless, but I mean, they outwardly, certainly they were fearless. I don't know. There's probably some sort of internal confusion about it, but yeah, I mean, they try to solve problems with technology. And I hope they keep trying to do that because I think that's their strong suit.
All right, so on that note, Guy, where can we find out more about you?
I'm going to pimp something first.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you for reminding me.
So did you have a Did you have a shop at Infinity?
I did. I have to confess, I went to Captain Quebec more often simply because it was closer, but I did go to Infinity as well.
One of those guys. So for the listeners at home, many years ago, like 80 years ago.
Before OS X.
Yeah, like a long time before OS X. I was probably before OS 2 even.
Don't say that yet.
I used to work at a comic shop called Infinity Comics. It was like an Infinity Comics in second edition. It was like the used bookstore it was attached to. And I worked with a guy called Jay Torres, who's a little bit older, awesome guy. Totally got me into all kinds of good comic-y stuff. And I recently found him on Twitter again. And here's the thing. And this sounds like a total pitch, and I'm sorry, I don't want to be, but it is a pitch, so I'm not sorry. He's got together a bunch of comic book writers and artists, and he's got an Indiegogo thing called True Patriot, and it's a comic purely about Canadian superheroes, because patriotism is about being Canadian, folks. So that's it. It's at indiegogo.com/True Patriot. And please just get in there a little bit. He's an awesome guy. It's going to be a fun book, and I wish him all the best. He really sort of gave me a lot of taste growing up. So if you like what I have to say, you're going to love this guy.
And I went, admit it, I saw you tweet the URL. I think it was a couple weeks ago. I went and bought whatever I could from there.
Yeah, I saw that you did that. That's awesome. Thank you.
No, I mean, that was an absolute no-brainer. That is exactly where I live. Literally.
It's Canadian. It's comics.
Yes.
Dirty stuff.
And the guy's on Twitter. I mean, what more could you hope for?
It's the trifecta right there.
Absolutely. So yeah, check that out. We'll have that in the show notes, and we'll add that to our Picks of the Week section so people can find it really easily.
Thanks a lot for letting me pimp something that has absolutely nothing to do with anything the listeners want to hear.
If Marco can talk about coffee and BMWs, and John can talk about carbonation, and Jim can talk about guitars, we're allowed to talk about comics.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. It's what makes us a technology podcast, damn it. All right, guys. So where can we find out more about you?
Kickingbear.com is where I write very occasionally. And I'm at GTE on Twitter and app.net.
And you are working on a Mac app called Napkin by Aged and Distilled with Chris Parrish.
Yeah, I was too busy pimping my friend's stuff. Yeah, that'll be out reasonably soon. We've got, honestly, things got delayed because Cingleton kind of took a lot out of me, and I've been sleeping for a while.
Well deserved.
Thank you. But yeah, that'll be out soon. probably 30 days later than we expect because of the Mac App Store reviews. But I'll come back and bitch about that some other time.
Absolutely. And we'll be using it. I've told you this personally, but we'll be using it a lot on iMore, so people will have a really good chance to see it in action.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. Thanks a lot for that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Guy, and hopefully I'll talk to you again soon.
My pleasure. Anytime.
And thank you, people in the chat room. You can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find all of us at iMore. You can email us at podcast@imore.com or just leave a comment on the show when it goes live. For all of our shows, you can find them at mobilenations.com/shows. Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll be back next week.